Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are at the Swiss Embassy. We start punctually. My name is Paul Seger. I'm the Swiss ambassador here, and I would like to welcome everybody. More specifically, I would like to welcome, first and foremost, the president of ALLEA, Professor Antonio Lopreno. Hello, Antonio. Nice to have you back here at the embassy. But also Deputy Dr. Lina Seitzel from the German Bundestag. Hello, Lina. Also great to have you here back as a close friend of Switzerland. But everybody else, happy to have you here. I'm grateful that we have such a large and numerous audience. And also, obviously, a dear welcome to everybody, guests who have joined us online. I'm very pleased to welcome you tonight at this evening event dedicated to the topic towards climate sustainability, taking the academic system from evidence to action. Today's event is a part of the International Science Festival called Berlin Science Week, which started yesterday and runs until 10th of November. During these 10 days, a varied program will provide you with inspiring insights into new research and innovation. Although I'm personally from Basel, I would particularly like to welcome you to a festival within the festival, the format Zurich Meets Berlin, which takes place from 5 to 8 November. The Berlin Science Week campus at the Museum für Naturkunde, Natural Science, will host various events created in collaboration between Zurich and Berlin. Tonight, we talk about ways and means how the academic system can become more sustainable. First, the results of the report commissioned by ALLEA will be presented, and then an international group of experts will share its hand-on experiences on how to address sustainability in practice. At the Swiss Embassy, we are currently also reflecting on our way of operating and how we could make our ways and means more sustainable. As a baseline, for instance, we are calculating our ecological footprint in cooperation with the Swiss Foundation My Climate. On the basis of these results, we should then receive, which we should receive in a few weeks, we'll develop specific measures to improve our impact on the environment. And I'm sure that tonight's discussion will provide us with some useful elements for this challenging task ahead. I think we should all start on our own doorsteps. Our actions in the area of sustainability count on the support of our special ambassador, the cow green lily you see up there in front. She's still very silent, but she's importantly there. If you'd like to know more about our sustainability programs or our activities in general of our embassy, please follow us on our social media, especially on LinkedIn. Now, before I hand over to Professor Dr. Antonio Lopreno, I would like to express my sincere thanks to ALLEA and the Junge Akademie for the excellent cooperation into the run-up of this event. Professor Lopreno, dear Antonio, you have the floor. Thank you.
Sehr geehrter Herr Botschafter, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is now my turn to thank you in the name of ALLEA, the European Federation of Academies of Sciences and Humanities, for being with us and to welcome you to today's event, which combines, I would say, both routine and novelty for us. Let's start with the routine. Today's event is a public presentation and discussion of what we call an ALLEA report. That is the result of the work of a group of international scholars and scientists that is gathered under the umbrella of ALLEA and has worked intensely on a topic of academic and social relevance, producing recommendations that can be hopefully be adopted by academic communities across Europe. The report we present today is devoted to climate sustainability in academia and conveys one key message. No sector of society can continue business as usual in the face of the climate crisis, and that includes, in a very strong sense, the academic system. Academic institutions have played indeed a key role in providing knowledge and evidence on the climate crisis, as well as delivering potential mitigation strategies. But the time has come for us, says our report, to look at the academic system, at our system itself from within, and move from evidence to action, as aptly suggested in the title of today's event. This will require us to become aware of our climate impact and take action to reduce it. In other words, start walking the talk. Accordingly, within ALLEA, we are preparing a number of measures to implement the recommendations applicable to ourselves, and we will work with our member academies to enhance the report's impact in the academic sector. I'm also tempted to say that a routine of sorts, and a very pleasant one at that, is the combination of venue and occasion for the presentation of this report, the Swiss Embassy in Berlin during the Berlin Science Week. We are particularly grateful to Ambassador Seeger and Councillor Gomez-Truetzon for opening once again Switzerland doors, and not only Switzerland doors, to a scientific event of European relevance, thus displaying once again this country's particular commitment to science and to Europe. Last year, we heard in this very venue during the Berlin Science Week a lecture by Professor Helen Keller, the recipient of our Madame de Stael Prize, on a topic ultimately related to the object of today's event, the increasing number, in her case, of environmental cases caused by the climate crisis brought before the European Human Rights Courts. Berlin and the Berlin Science Week, now for us at ALLEA for the third time, are particularly important for us. Berlin is our Heimat, to use this German word. And as European scientists, we consider ourselves very fortunate to have our strategic and administrative center here in this vibrant German capital. The title of this year's week, Paradigm Shift, Co-Creating a Sustainable Now, appears to us to be very fitting with the topic of today's event. Now to the non-routine, that is the novelty part of today's event. And I would say primarily it is the leadership of the working group by the Junge Akademie, that is by the German Young Academy. The German Young Academy, the Junge Akademie, is the first Young Academy of Sciences to have acquired membership in ALLEA. In their first year, they already became an incredibly active member of our federation, even going as far as to have an elected sitting member on our board, and also putting forth a project proposal for an ALLEA working group, which is precisely the working group, the result of whom we are going to hear something today, focusing on carbon emission directly attributed to the academic system and finding alternatives to reduce the climate impact on the academic world as a whole. For ALLEA, the membership not only of older academies, but of young academies is a strategic priority. And there is an existential reason for us, for this choice, for us as European academies as a whole. The focus of our attention as academies has somewhat shifted from producing science, which was the focus of academies of sciences for the last 300 years, and that has now been acquired by other institutions, such as universities, to strengthening the role of science in society, science communication, science diffusion, science advice, ethics of science in society. And precisely in this respect, in this opening of our academic work to the dialogue with society, young academies are a natural, not only sparring partner, but a natural priority for more established learned societies. So we very much hope and have reasons to believe that many more young academies across Europe will very soon join the ALLEA Federation. I now would like to thank all those who have helped us organize this event. I already mentioned the Swiss Embassy, but also our own staff, in particular, Dino Tramontani for ALLEA and Dr. Alexandra Heidle from the Junge Akademie. And now, I would like to cede the floor to someone who will be able to offer in-depth insights into the topic, Professor Astrid Eichhorn of the University of Southern Denmark. Professor Eichhorn was chair of the ALLEA Working Group on Climate Sustainability and as chair, one of the lead authors of our ALLEA report. I would like, Astrid, to thank you very much for your incredibly hard work since the inception of the ALLEA Working Group, acting as its chair to the present day on the outreach of the ALLEA report, and if I may say so, even during your recent maternity leave, which is a true testament to your commitment to our common cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio, for this very friendly introduction. It's indeed a pleasure to present the report towards climate sustainability in the academic system in Europe and beyond. The report is available online. It was published in May this year, and it has 3 key messages. Those are, first, that the academic system is currently not climate sustainable. That means we need to take action now. However, that action is already starting, and that's the second key message. Individual stakeholders are taking first steps towards climate sustainability. Those first steps will not be sufficient to make the academic system climate sustainable. However, there is more we can do, and that's the third key message. There are many options of action which are available right now for all stakeholders to become more climate sustainable. And in this presentation, I would like to expand on those 3 key messages. The context of the report is the academic system within the context of the global climate crisis. And within that crisis, of course, academia is part of the solution through education, through research, and through evidence-based policy advice. However, there is a second aspect, and the second aspect has been much less in focus, and that is that academia itself is part of the problem because it is producing emissions from its own operations. And this is the aspect that I would like to focus on, and that is the focus of the ALLEA report. Now, to support the claim that academia is actually part of the problem, in the report we provide data and examples, some of which I will present to you in order to make the case clear. In order to interpret the data, we need some form of benchmark. And we get that directly from the IPCC 2022 report, where it's estimated that there is a quote-unquote budget of about 300 gigatons of CO2 equivalent emissions for a high chance to limit global warming below 1.5 degrees. And I find those 300 gigatons are a really abstract number. What does this actually mean for my day-to-day actions as a scientist? However, you can break those 300 gigatons down to what it means per person per year until 2050. And it actually boils down to just 1 ton per capita per year. We use that 1 ton not as a very, very strict boundary, but we use that more to set an order of magnitude in order to understand whether an activity is more or less climate sustainable. So if we have activities that produce significantly more than 1 ton per person per year, then these activities are not very climate sustainable. If we have activities that produce significantly less, then those are more climate sustainable. So this 1 ton, you should keep that in mind as setting the order of magnitude, and that allows us to judge the emissions that come from the academic system. So with that in mind, let's move on to the stakeholders that we looked at in the report. And what we looked at are those stakeholders that make up the academic system as a whole. Those are, of course, universities and research institutes, as well as individuals, individual students, individual academics, but also the larger environment of funding organizations, conference organizers, academies, of course, ranking agencies, and of course, policymakers. Now, what I would like to do for the presentation here is to just give you briefly a few examples from 5 of these stakeholders, namely universities, research institutes, funding organizations, conference organizers, and also individuals, in order to highlight that the academic system is actually not climate sustainable. So let's start directly with universities. What you're seeing here is a sample of 25 different European universities with some geographic diversity who publish climate reports. And what we look at here is the greenhouse gas emissions per employee in ton CO2 equivalent per year, so something we can compare directly to this benchmark of 1 ton. Now, what you see is that most universities in here produce more than this 1 ton, some of them significantly more, so they don't seem to be very climate sustainable in their operations. The second thing you might note, though, is that there is quite a bit of spread in these numbers. And you might first think that that might come from the different profiles the different universities have. However, in fact, it comes from the fact that there isn't an agreed upon standard in reporting of greenhouse gas emissions for universities. So every university can basically report whatever it wants on and leave out important sources. So in fact, those universities in light blue here, they only focus on what is called scope 1 and 2, which means direct emissions and emissions that come from electricity and heating. In contrast, those universities in darker blue, which are all rather to the right side, they try to be more comprehensive in their climate reports and include what is called scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 is basically everything else in terms of indirect emissions, for instance, emissions from travel, emissions from the supply chain, emissions that arise at labs. I will have more examples in a second. What that actually means is that those universities in dark blue, more to the right with the higher numbers, they are likely giving a better estimate of what their actual greenhouse gas emissions are. And if you look at those numbers, they are all significantly above this benchmark of 1 ton. So this tells you that universities are currently not very climate sustainable in their operations. Now let's take a look more specifically at what the sources of greenhouse gas emissions are. And here I'm showing you a graph from the University of Copenhagen, who tried to do a more comprehensive climate report. You can see in red, this little fraction, which is about 10%, that is what comes from electricity and heating. And then there are lots of other sources of greenhouse gas emissions, including new buildings, including the maintenance of buildings. Then over here in lighter green, supply chain, canteen food, all of these things matter. Also travel and accommodation, but also, as you can see down here, emissions that are related to labs. So those are emissions that come very directly from research activities. And to look even closer at that, we have also included research institutes in our report. Now, not all disciplines actually report on their carbon emissions. Some disciplines engage with the topic more than others, and astronomy is actually a very good example here, in the sense that within the astronomical community, there seems to be more of an awareness for the topic, and therefore a number of studies have already been published on the climate impact of astronomical research. So what you see here is numbers from a study that compares the greenhouse gas emissions of an Australian astronomer, averaged, of course, across Australia, to an astronomer at a German research institute, and you can see it's 42 or 18 tons per year, so very significantly above this benchmark of 1 ton. One of the interesting things to note here is that there is a significant part of the emissions that comes from flying to conferences, to observational sites, and so on. But there is also a very significant fraction that comes from electricity, and the majority of that is actually from scientific computing. So what we are seeing here is an example where we have a research activity that very directly leads to very high greenhouse gas emissions. And across several other disciplines, similar examples exist. Now, moving on to the broader framework of the academic system, funding organizations, they do, of course, produce emissions in their own operations. For instance, the ERC interviews lead to about 1 ton in greenhouse gas emissions per interview. And of course, only every second one of those is successful. So before a research grant has even started, it has already produced about 2 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. There is, however, then a really important data gap, which is that no funding organization that we were aware of when we wrote the report actually reports or even collects information on the emissions from the funded research. And we've seen on the previous slide that there are examples where emissions from the funded research can be quite high. So this is a really important data gap, and I am aware that a number of funding organizations are now starting to think about that topic more in depth. Now moving on to conference organizers, the main source of greenhouse gas emissions here is, of course, flights to conferences. And averaging across many different disciplines and conferences, there is about 1 ton of greenhouse gas emissions per participant for an international conference. And of course, scientists, academics, not necessarily just limit their travel to just one conference per year, but typically attend several of those. So very quickly we go above this benchmark of 1 ton. There are, of course, ways of holding conferences which are more climate sustainable, for instance, in a virtual format where emissions aren't zero because you need to connect, for instance, via an online platform. So you need your laptop, you still use electricity, but you can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by anywhere between 94 up to 99%. There are, of course, very good arguments to hold some events in person and not in a virtual format. There is still the possibility to save greenhouse gas emissions, though. There are estimates that by choosing your location carefully so that you limit long-haul travel and that you limit the number of layovers necessary to get a location, you can reach reductions anywhere between 20 and 50%. Now, staying on the topic of air travel, let me move on to individual academics. And in our report for individuals, we actually focus on the question of air travel because that is a question that is universal across all disciplines. Other questions are more discipline-specific, but it's true across all disciplines that we travel in order to connect internationally, in order to disseminate our research results internationally. And numerous examples suggest that the emissions from flights that arise in this way are typically significantly higher than the average per capita emissions from air travel in the corresponding countries, which again is telling us that academia isn't very climate sustainable, also at this individual level. That would suggest that we should demand that academics limit or reduce the amounts of flights that they take. But that is, of course, a very contentious question, and it typically leads to a lot of discussion. And there are valid concerns that are being raised in these discussions and valid questions that exist. On some of these questions, there are actually answers provided by the data, and I would like to share 2 of those. One of them is, well, isn't actually air travel necessary to achieve academic impact? And there are 2 studies that have asked that question, and they do not find a significant correlation between measures of impact and the amount of air travel, which actually tells us that in order to achieve academic impact, maybe it isn't in fact necessary to fly as much as we're used to doing. The second question that is often asked is, well, isn't it true that early career researchers need to travel in order to network? And I believe that that is true. It is true for a lot of people that networking, for instance, across a Zoom screen doesn't work as effectively as networking in person. So then some amount of travel still needs to happen. But is it actually the early career researchers who are doing most of the flying? There is data on that from some institutions, for instance, EPFL and ETH. And the dark blue lines, this is the amount of air travel done by professors. So this is normalized to 100%. And then you see the fraction of that done by the early career researchers, by the postdocs, and by the PhD students. So you see that those are rather small fractions of the amount of air travel done by the more senior researchers. So therefore, if you're saying there is an individual within academia who should be reducing the amount of air travel, looking at that graph, would you say that those are the early career researchers? Well, maybe not. So summarizing the data and examples that I presented, they all fit into a larger picture that tells us that academia in its current operations is not climate sustainable. What does it actually take to reach climate sustainability? What it actually takes is a change in culture so that we build climate sustainability in our everyday operations in all of our decision-making processes. And a change in culture requires a change at the individual level, a change in our individual behavior, but it also requires a change in the framework conditions because those set the norms for behaviors and they incentivize and de-incentivize certain behaviors. And therefore, change is necessary both at the level of individuals as well as at the level of organizations and institutions. And the key message of our report is that there are many individual stakeholders who have recognized that and who have started taking steps to become more climate sustainable. And I would just like to highlight 3 examples. One is a change that you can take that doesn't actually require a change in behavior. And that is a rather simple change to implement where, for instance, as a university rector, a top-down strategy that is imposed can be rather successful. And a good example for that is green energy on campus that is arriving on more and more university campi across Europe, for instance, in the form of solar cells on campus. And if you remember the initial data, that can lead to quite significant reductions in the greenhouse gas emissions of a university. Now, a second example is a more tricky one because it's one which requires a behavioral change. And so therefore, a simple top-down strategy where you fail to get everybody who needs to change their behavior on board might not be successful. However, there are institutions who have developed successful bottom-up processes and involved all of the relevant individuals in the development of a travel policy. And there are success stories where these new travel policies have already led to some reductions in the actual amount of air travel and greenhouse gas emissions. And then the last example is one that is based on probably everybody's experience during the pandemic, that a lot of our physical mobility, where we had previously traveled to have a 1 or 2 hour meeting, that can actually very effectively be substituted by virtual mobility, and that a lot of meetings do not need to take place in person, but can take place virtually, thereby saving greenhouse gas emissions, and I might add, also being more family friendly. Now, what is next beyond those first steps? That's the third key message of the report. There is a lot that all stakeholders in academia can do right now. The recommendations that we provide aim to be not just general overarching principles and abstract guidelines, but they aim to be very specific, actionable steps. And if you take a look at the recommendations in our report, which I invite all of you to do, you may find that some of them seem quite obvious. And that is because we don't necessarily need very big new ideas to take those next steps towards climate sustainability. We simply need to implement those ideas that already exist. Now, I will be saying a little bit more about recommendations for individual stakeholders. Before I do that, let me say something on 3 recommendations that we make across all stakeholders. The first is, don't be ideological about formats of meetings. So don't say meetings can only happen online or every single meeting needs to be in person. Instead, think about the various formats that exist, in person, hybrid, or online, and think about what is the best format to suit the needs of your meeting. So take a flexible mix and match approach. In such an approach, an increasing number of meetings will probably happen in a hybrid or online format. And so the second recommendation we make is to improve our virtual communication. And that in particular goes for hybrid formats. That means we need to improve the technology, but it also means we need to improve the skills. We all need to learn how to better and more effectively communicate across a Zoom screen. And we also need to think about formats that work well in an online format. Many of us have probably made the experience that having a conference online and simply having an online coffee break does not work as effectively as in an in-person format. Instead, we need to think about better ways how to use tools that are available only online in order to make events suitable for the online format. And then the third recommendation for all stakeholders is to base your actions on a solid evidence base. If you don't have a solid evidence base, you might be missing the quote-unquote low-hanging fruit, or you might be investing a lot of effort in reducing a source of greenhouse gas emissions that is only making up a very tiny fraction of your overall emissions. So it's important to have a solid evidence base. However, get to that evidence base in an efficient way so you're not investing all of your efforts in simply creating an evidence base. Because if you have published a climate report, you have done exactly nothing to reduce your emissions. So don't stop at publishing a climate report. In some sense, the climate report is step 0, not even step 1. Now, let me get to the recommendations for all of the various stakeholders in the academic system. And I will be providing just selected examples here, so you can find longer lists in our report. And I will not be going through all of those stakeholders here. Instead, what I would like everybody in this room to do is to put themselves in a box. So identify whether you view yourself as a student, as a member of a university, maybe as a member of an academy, or a representative of a funding organization, or representing policymakers. And once you have put yourself in the box, I will show the recommendations and I will stop talking for 15 seconds so you can all read the recommendations in your various boxes. So here you go. All right, the 15 seconds are up. So you might have noticed that there was one stakeholder that was missing from the list, and that is the individual academic. And that is because there is one recommendation I would like to specifically highlight, and that's for individuals to consider all your opportunities for leverage. The academic system is a special system in society in that it is much more self-determined and freer from external determination than many other systems. And that means that many of us actually have roles as university rectors, as academy presidents, as leaders of a research institute or a research team, as referees for funding organizations, or in similar roles. We have possibilities to change not just our individual behaviors, but to take part in determining the very framework conditions of our system. So the academic system is a system which is to a large degree self-determined by us. And that means that many of us are not just individual academics who can think about the individual behaviors, but have possibilities where we can impact the conditions in which the whole system operates. So consider all of these opportunities for leverage. Consider where you're not just an individual, but where you are contributing to setting the framework conditions and the norms within the system. So with that, I come to the summary of my presentation. The three key messages again are that we are currently in a situation that necessarily has to change, and has to change very quickly, because the academic system is not currently climate sustainable. However, this has been recognized by many individuals and individual organizations who are taking first steps to become more climate sustainable. And beyond those first steps, there are many options of action available right now that many of us can implement. So with that, I'm now very much looking forward to our panel discussion, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our panelists to you. So for that, let me just quickly grab my cheat sheet, and I will be introducing our panelists in alphabetical order by last name. And they bring together a very diverse set of expertise and perspectives on the climate sustainability of academia, including what I would like to call the grassroots perspective, the institutional perspective, and the perspective of policymakers. So first, Jeroen Dobbelaar. Jeroen is a cell biologist who was trained in Belgium, in Switzerland, the UK, and Austria, and he studies cell-to-cell communication and cell division. He founded a grassroots group, which is called Climate at Max Perutz Labs at the University of Vienna in 2019. And this grassroots group looks at how academic research itself can move to the very forefront of becoming climate sustainable. The group focuses on collecting data on the environmental footprint of life sciences and using that data to allow others to make fact-based decisions, and they communicate that data to peers and students to induce a behavioral change. And Jeroen also started the Climate Café, which is an interactive format to discuss sustainability in academia. He's also the author of several blogs and papers on sustainability, so a very warm welcome to Jeroen. Then we have Martin Farley. Martin started Europe's first sustainable lab post at the University of Edinburgh in 2013. In 2014, he moved to King's College in London to initiate their sustainable lab program. And in 2015, he founded the Green Lab Associates, which is a consultancy that drives sustainable science. He currently works as the Sustainable Lab Manager at the University College London, from which he created, and he manages the LEAF program, about which we will hear more. He speaks, writes, and engages very widely on sustainable science. So a very warm welcome to Martin. Next up is Omar Kassab, who is the Deputy Head of Sustainability at ETH Zurich's Office of the President. and who holds a lecturer position at the Department of Environmental System Science. He has been engaged in various participatory projects, including the university's sustainability reporting, the organization of an international lecture series on the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as coordinating the university-wide net zero strategy. In his own research, he has focused on analyzing the impact of sustainability science and the academic incentive and reward system. Some of his former stations include the German Foreign Office in Nepal, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation in East Jerusalem, and the Competence Center for Environment and Sustainability of the ETH domain. And he enjoys liaising and translating between ecosystems, fostering connections between stakeholders from all sectors to enable sustainable partnerships and transformation. Welcome, Omar. And last, we will hear a very different perspective, namely the perspective from policymaking from Dr. Lina Seitzel, who's a member of the Bundestag and the rapporteur on the international biodiversity policy and especially on the Convention on Biological Diversity of the parliamentary SPD group. She's also dealing with linkages between health and environment. In the Bundestag, she joined the Committee on the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection, and the Committee on Education, Research and Technology Assessment. As a member of the Committee on Education, she focuses on higher education policies. Welcome, Lina. So we will now hear 5 minutes brief and hopefully inspirational and question-raising impulse talks from the four of them before moving on to the panel discussion. And Joan goes first.
Thank you, Astrid, for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to present our project, Climate at Max Brut, which is a grassroots group of cell biologists founded in 2019. And this is located in one of the institutes of the Vienna Biocenter, which is the University of Vienna Medical University and also the Austrian Academy of Science. And yeah, the question I want to ask is sustainable research possible, and is this or could this be science fiction? So, like I said, I'm still working on a bench, as you can see here, and as a biologist, we're very interested in finding out the little details. And just to show you what I'm actually interested in is basal bodies and cilia, which I guess nobody has heard of, but most human cells have one. So the only problem is it's very tiny. It's 10 million times smaller than a finger, so you cannot see it. But what we do is we use the tools to do this, and one of the tools we use is a microscope to find out these small little details. So what we decided to do was actually turn the microscope upside down and look at ourselves. Because where there's a lot of data published on cilia, there's around 1,500 peer-reviewed papers every year. There's very few data, as Astrid also mentioned, on how we do research. And the three key parts about our group is data gathering and analysis of how we do science. We also want to inform our peers and students, and we also want to get a little bit on the political level and make sure sustainability becomes a key value for our university. And we also started with the problem that there was very little data available. So there was no CO2 footprint of the institute. So as a group, we made our CO2 footprint. And what I wanted to show is that we managed in 3 years, more or less, to get the same footprint as Astrid talked on electricity, heating, and mobility. But what we didn't manage, which is here left out, which should be in gray, but is left out, is our footprint of products. And one of the things we did was we actually contacted companies and asked them, do you know the footprint of the products we're buying? And most of them said in 2019, no, we don't know it. But we didn't stop there. And then some of the companies actually went and did their homework and then provided us with some data, which I show here for 2 companies, Merck and New England Biolabs. The important data is not the numbers of the products we buy or the tons of CO2, but what we found out was actually the biggest part of the CO2 footprint of these products was shipping them from the company to our sites, because what we order is not big amounts, but often very small things. And this you can see here, this is like a ratio 6 for Merck, and in the NEB case, it's actually the yellow bar, which you can see is the part which is the CO2 footprint of products. And this we're now doing with companies is they're actually willing to change, and they're actually changing the packaging and also changing their delivery chains, so to reduce this part of our CO2 footprint. The second example of things we're doing I want to show is a paper we just published together with Nicolien Borgerman from the University of Copenhagen and Jan Heidelberger from the Max Planck Society, is to find out, again, data on these grassroots groups, because there was, again, no data published. So we ourselves did a survey and also study on this. And two key observations we made was, you can see on top here of the graph, is that actually a lot of sustainable projects at university and academia still rely on volunteers, and we actually found that actually 80% of the projects are done by volunteers. And very few or the minority of universities have a coordinator person on sustainability. So 60% of the universities we monitored don't have a dedicated person. And from this survey, we also recommended 12 parts, how this energy that is actually there. So many people at universities want to change and want to help this transformation. And in principle is that these groups like ours need more financial support, more practical support like IT, but they also need a seat at the table. So what we often happens is that we're not invited in the key decision makings. So it would be good to incorporate in your institution these people and find a way to get to a good dialogue. So to summarize, I think it's a tough job to make academia sustainable, but it's not science fiction. I think it's possible if we start now. And my 3 recommendations is get the data, and this will then allow you to make fact-based decisions. We can still learn from other sectors, and I think one nice example is the science-based targets from set for private companies. We could also incorporate something in academia, and I guess this could be part of the discussion afterwards. And a part which I didn't talk about much is, I think as universities, teachers, we have a very high responsibility to prepare the next generations for the challenges ahead. So we really need to incorporate sustainability in all aspects of academia and especially research. So thanks, and I'll just have the references here and the contact details if somebody wants to find out more. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you want to change? See?
Actually, well, maybe actually, yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard on the neck. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Greetings, folks. My name is Martin Farley, and oh, there we go. Yes, beautiful venue, I have to say. I'm from University College London, and I work on sustainable laboratories, so trying to make the sciences more environmentally sustainable. Now, in the UK, we have a net zero target for 2050, and our own institutions have net zero targets. Ours is 2030. But I think most interestingly is UKRI, which is our largest funder, have set a net zero target for 2040, including for their funding recipients, albeit we admittedly don't know exactly how we're going to do it. Yes, I should add. This is data from UCL, and this is our attempt at trying to estimate our overall carbon emissions. And if you're astute, you'll notice that our figures are different between our institutions, highlighting the difference in methodologies that we use. But what I do want to say is that actually around half of our energy consumption goes towards our science facilities. And actually from our estimate, around half of our carbon emissions was going towards our science facilities. And at least the energy consumption figures are exactly what we find for any science-intensive institution. University of Oxford, I think, is actually higher than that. King's, where I used to work, was around half, if not a little bit higher. So really, our science facilities, in terms of our energy consumption and around our carbon emissions, well, is a good target. Now, we don't know exactly how to do it, though. It was great to see this grant come out. And this is from the Medical Research Council. And this is essentially them saying we don't know how to do net zero science, because they put out a £1 million grant in January to say, to allow us some enabling research to better understand it. So we do need more research in this space to understand how we're going to do it, because we don't have all the answers for this. But, whoa, that was loud. While we do need more enabling research, we need to take action now. And there are a lot of things that we know we can do. And I think Astrid highlighted quite a few of them, so it's great to hear. And there are a lot of things that we can do within our science facilities that actually have big impacts when we cascade them out. The other analogy I really like to make is that, when we wanted to make science safe, we didn't say, everybody make up your own standard, let us know if you made it, and report on some figures. And that's kind of what we've done with sustainability today. We've essentially said each institution needs to figure out their own targets, find their own path, set their own strategy, and maybe they make it, maybe not. I would argue that, in the timeline that we have, we need action and standards, and we need these to be actioned as quickly as possible. And we have common health and safety standards. Everybody uses them now, and we accept them. And I would argue that we could use common sustainability standards and to make it easier for everybody. So the one I've been working on is LEAF, and that's really focused on sustainable lab operations. So everything that somebody within a science facility has agency over. It's actions that are practical, that lead to reductions in carbon emissions now in the areas you might expect. So ventilation equipment, people, chemicals, waste, and etc. It's a user-led initiative broken up into bronze, silver, gold. And we have calculators that allow you to estimate the impact, because typically you actually save a fair bit of carbon and money when you take these actions. Most of these things, we're trying to get people to use things longer, to reuse more, and etc. I won't go through these, but you can find examples of the criteria online. And I will say, too, that we piloted it for a few years in developing it. And I think one of the headlines is that the actions people take, we need to invest in people resources, but actually the actions they take lead to financial savings and carbon reductions as well. And we tried to estimate them. Huge standard deviation, I have to say, because there's large variation in what people are doing, the state of their lab, buildings, and etc. So very quickly, I'll just say that LEAF has been online for 1.5 years now, and it's grown much quicker than I expected to. It's spread around Europe. There's some institutions in Germany now that are using it, and we're trying to develop new versions, because actually there's a lot of specialist environments that are seeking guidance on how to be sustainable. And if we can standardize it, we can make it easy, we can make it quicker. And so we've been growing the program, and we've been engaging with, very quickly, I'll just say we put a lot of resources online, to give practical advice on how to do these things, because that's actually what a lot of the scientific community says they're looking for, is just guidance on how to do these things. But last thing I'll just say is it was great, because actually the Medical Research Council announced their membership to LEAF, but actually said that they were going to require it for their own institutes. And that was part of the idea in creating LEAF, was that potentially one day it could be a metric for sustainable labs that funders potentially could use or could help in the process. That's it from myself, I think. Yes, a lot of people to thank, but thank you, Astrid, and thank you, ALLEA, for today's opportunity. And I will pass over now.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to share the perspective from ETH Zurich on what we consider, or how we think about climate neutrality, and how we think about net zero. So practically, the Swiss government, in a very evil top-down approach, basically issued the mandate for the whole federal administration to become climate zero by 2030. And since ETH is part of the wider system of federal administration, we're also affected by that. So what does it mean concretely? Reduce by at least 50% by 2030 compared to 2006. That's the general idea. And with this mandate, it was obvious for us that we have to get going. So we sat down, developed the group, and the result is this white paper we just published a couple of weeks ago, which basically outlines where we stand today. This is the very beginning of a very long journey, I have to say, specifically for the reasons I'm going to mention in a moment. So we heard about scope 1, 2, and 3. I don't know if everyone's familiar with the concept of these scopes. If not, I would quickly walk you through this again. So basically, that's the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. That's an organization that came up with a categorization of emissions, of greenhouse gas emissions, that can be split into different sources, or how they call it, scopes. And scope 1 is everything that happens within the institution. So let's say the Swiss ambassador has a car, and that's diesel fueled. That means all the emissions. It's not, okay? So that's okay, good. So it's like has a bit less emissions than it would have if it was a full fossil fuel, but these emissions would be under the direct control of the Swiss embassy. So you would put them on the balance sheet of the Swiss embassy, and you're working on that, as I understood. The second one is scope 2 on the left-hand side. That's if you buy electricity from some external provider. That's also on your balance sheet, right? Because you use the energy, and the emissions happen somewhere before this turns into electricity and gets into your socket. And the third one is the blue arrows. It's scope 3. It's everything else, as Astrid introduced earlier. Now, if we look at that from an ETH perspective, scope 1 and scope 2, I have to say we're very much on track. So if we compare, you can see that now, but it's like minus 46% compared to 2006. So we already reached this in a way by means of awareness raising, by means of renovations, by means of efficiency gains and technologies. So we're pretty much on track when it comes to scope 1 and scope 2, which is a very critical part of the story. But then we have only been looking at only parts of scope 3 so far. And we've also heard that unlike, not unlike very many other institutions, we've been looking at only a share of the scope 3 emissions, which is precisely employee commute, business travel, and gastronomy, you could say. So me traveling here on a train, I wanted to mention that, has something to do with ETH's greenhouse gas balance, because I used the train to come here. So somehow this is scope 3, right? So here, we might wonder what's happening to all the other stuff. There's so much stuff going on besides these two categories. And so if you want to look at what we've studied until now, it's these three categories. It's precisely business travel, catering, and commuting. And for all these, we've had like very intense programs and projects. Maybe we can talk about that in the discussion. Air travel is a big thing, raising awareness among the community, catering. But then we made a study focusing specifically on scope 3. And here again, like, don't take this for 100% granted, because as we heard, there's a lot of different methodologies to do this. But we did that, and I can tell you, scope 3 really is a game changer, because this is what we found. You might not be able to read this now, but these are all categories, all of which belong to scope 3, meaning the indirect emissions that happen somewhere in the value chain. And the top categories, I'm going to mention 3 of them, really fall back, amount to 50% of our entire scope 3 emissions. So that would be buildings. Yeah, construction is a big thing. You think about the building materials. Renovation is a big thing. That happens constantly. There's this thing in Switzerland, fix before it's broken. So there's constant renovations going on. The other one is laboratory materials. I think it's amazing that we have these 2 colleagues here on stage that have really focused on this over the course of the past years. And the third thing is scientific apparatuses and machines and tools, all of which somewhere by it's questions of procurement ultimately. So we might say, of course, it's important to look at how people travel, how they commute, to eat less meat, for example. That's very important. But really, the big levers are somewhere else, and that really tackles, or we have to really tackle not these like small things on a daily basis, like waste and paper. Of course, we have to do this, but ultimately, we really have to change the minds. We have to change how research happens. We have to think about how education happens. And we've just started with that, which is a series of events, of campaigns that we're planning. What's very important is participation. Get everyone on board, because ultimately everyone's relevant, right? Everyone with his or her daily decision-making and behavior has something to do with greenhouse gas emissions, be it 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the scopes. So what I'm trying to say, there's so much we have to do still, and we're only at the beginning of the journey. Thank you very much.
Yes, so thank you very much for this event. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm also very happy that this is part of Berlin Science Week and that research and academic institutions take this topic on forefront of the discussion, which I think is great. I mean, what you described in the beginning, Astrid, is a discrepancy, right? On the one hand, academic institutions are central, or are the ones that provide us with the knowledge about climate change and about the effects of climate change. And on the other hand, academic institutions produce a lot of carbon emissions and are part of the problem, as you said. And I think, of course, it's a discrepancy, but it mirrors society. It mirrors the fact that people with high income have higher emissions or produce higher emissions than people with low income. I think that's just the result. And of course, it's because it is also because academic institutions are very international institutions. There's a lot of traveling. There's a lot of energy needed in doing research and so on and so forth. That's all very much understandable. I'm looking at this from a policy perspective now, and maybe that's also the reason why I'm the only one without slides. But I hope my talk will not be too boring. And from a policy perspective, although academia is so international, the policy perspective is a very national one. And I think that's important also for this debate, because you are all coming from different institutions in different countries. So what I'm proposing or suggesting might be different in different countries. And I think there are two ways how you can think about how policymakers can influence climate sustainability in research institutions. And maybe one last thing, because before I talk about these two issues, it's not that easy to intervene as policymakers in research, because there's this freedom of research, which I think is a very, very I mean, it's the essence of research. But then we are all part of the same world, when we are all facing the same problem, namely climate change. So I think there needs to be a way how the state, how policymaking can kind of intervene in these questions. So first of all, in Germany, as well as in most European countries, most academic institutions are public institutions, which means that, for example, the buildings belong to the state, whichever level, but they belong to the state, which means that the state pays the researchers in many cases. And through this way, of course, there are many means and opportunities, possibilities to influence how climate sustainability is done at research institutions. One of it is, of course, investing in the modernization, renovation of buildings. Those of you who know German universities know that these buildings mostly are not very modern and energy saving and so on and so forth. So this question about photovoltaic on roofs is a central one, and it's actually easy to solve. I mean, we as politicians always talk about the fact that we need green energy, but we can do it. We can actually do it because we have the buildings. So I think that that's one of the things we need to do. And then the issues about procurement, supply chain, travel regulations. Do you need to take the plane if you can take the train? Stuff like that. I think those are the easy steps you talked about in your presentation and also in the report that policymakers can implement. But what I think is key in all this is that like looking from a policymaker perspective on all this, it's often about money. And it's of course often about investment, but investment which pays off not only because we fight climate change, but also because we actually save money from energy efficient buildings, for example. And I think it is important that this money stays within the research institutions and it does not go back to the public funds, because then it sets incentives to the research institutions to actually also financial incentives to implement those things. And then a second way how the state can influence research institutions or research in general is, of course, through the means of public funding of research projects. I mean, the ERC is publicly funded. The DFG is the German Forschungsgemeinschaft Research Society is a publicly funded institution. So those are also means how to implement those. And as I'm a member of the Social Democratic Party, which forms this government, this federal government, we have agreed on expanding funds, research funds for areas that are key for the future. So Zukunftsmission, we call them Zukunftsmission, future missions, which are in the areas of climate protection, resourceful economies, clean energies, and sustainable mobility, so that we give money for research in these areas, which is also a way how policymaking can influence climate sustainability in research institutions. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all four of you. Lots of food for thought. Just to mention a few points, maybe, Jerome, there are only volunteers, or mostly volunteers in sustainability. What does this actually say about how seriously we take that topic? Martin raising the important question of how do we set targets? How do we get agreed upon standards? Omar with a very thought-provoking example of policymakers getting universities to act in a top-down approach. And then Lina with this question of academic freedom and, well, where does this freedom actually end? Shouldn't there be limits to academic freedom in some situations? So lots of food for our discussion. So the discussion will focus on the question of taking the academic system from evidence to action. So we'll focus on some best practice examples, but we will also focus on the question, where did some initiatives fail and how, where and why did they fail? Because from failure, of course, we can also learn about how to go forward and how to do that in a better way. And then mostly we will focus on understanding how do we get beyond these individual initiatives and engage in a broader effort that really takes the whole academic system and makes a systemic effort to transform the academic system as a whole to becoming more climate sustainable. And we will also specifically discuss the role of policymakers in that transformation. So let's kick off with the discussion right away. And after some time, I will also be taking questions both from the audience here in the room and also online. And I already see some questions coming in online, and I invite everyone who's joining us online to post more questions. Hopefully we'll get through most of them. So let's get started with the first question, which is, where did some of the initiatives that you were involved in fail, and where were they not so successful? And is there something we can learn from that for this broader effort? In any order.
I'll start. So so we took the data approach on gathering information about how we do science, and one obvious one was the energy usage in the lab. And this is only a partial failure. We didn't manage for 2 or 3 years to convince the management to change policies. Still, the energy crisis happened this year, and now things moved forward very quickly. And so we underestimated the financial aspect in our calculations. So data was good, but in the end, it gets to often to money and resources. The other example, which I think is a positive one for us, was the discussion on mobility. Is there we did the same approach, gathering data. We even organized several events on mobility and new forms of communication, and this was picked up quickly by the rectorate, also not only efforts from us, but also other groups at the university. And now the University of Vienna has a travel policy in place, which is more or less using this feedback loop of gathering money in a separate pot of money, which will then be reinvested for sustainable projects. So this is 2 experiences I can share.
Thanks for sharing. And maybe that also highlights how important it is that sustainability actually becomes a key part of an institution's strategy, because there are, of course, often decisions which are a conflict between sustainability and, for instance, financial resources. And as long as sustainability isn't a core part of the strategy, that conflict will most often be resolved not in favor of climate sustainability, as in the example you've highlighted. So, Martin, would you like to confess some of your failures?
Well, let me put it that way. Now, the one I was thinking about, one of the challenges and barriers that we come across is essentially that sustainability is voluntary, and that people are busy, and there's relatively high turnover in academia, people come and go. So there's a good initiative in place and somebody leaves, and then somebody else comes and it's gone, and you've lost it and you can't do it again. Or you know, the other person's busy. And the same goes for building projects too. You know, if efficiencies aren't required, then they'll get value engineered and they'll get taken out. And an example of you know, succeeding, I think, comes from, I wasn't involved with it, but it was University of Essex, and they were having trouble implementing LEAF through their sustainability team, and so they went, instead of going to the academics directly or to the sustainability team, they went to the lab management staff and the technicians, who already have a structure in the lab. They're more present often. They're permanent staff, a lot of them, and they care. They cared a lot about the environments, and there was a natural structure there for them to implement these things. So I just thought it was a great example of looking at, and they did require it as well, and that helps of their technical staff. But I thought it was nice to think about engaging other groups alongside academics to achieve some of these sustainability wins.
Thanks. That I'm sure is a really helpful example to share the fact that in order to reach climate sustainability in academia, we can't do it on our own, right? And we need to look out for where we find allies. Ma?
Do you want me to confess failures as well, or can I just jump to the success story?
I think the failures can also be very educational, so if you have one.
I think one thing that I recall was when a bunch of students showed up and they said, what happens to the old laptops? Can we not use them to like open them and look inside them or repair them? So practical idea. And then I was intrigued, and I asked the IT services, okay, what's happening to all these laptops? Because everyone gets a laptop, right? And every second year they get kind of replaced or so. And then they told me the process, which is basically they wipe them and then they send them, then they sell them to someone, and this person again sells them on the internet. This is what happens. And I was like, wow, can we not like take some of those and give them to the students? And I was like, no, never change a running system. Yeah, because it's like data protection issues, and so there's all these like little things that popped up which made this project impossible. And I found this quite disillusioning, to be perfectly frank. And up until now, I mean, now the thing has changed. You as a private person can buy it off your institution and then use it for private purposes. That's at least something to extend the life cycle and keep it in the system somehow. And a success story I would like to share is, and that's a concept that a lot of universities use, is basically the living lab approach. Probably some of you have heard of it yet already, but like capitalizing on the core competencies of the university to change something on the campus. So what we did is we looked at food. We took 2 canteens, which are similar in size on 2 different campus sites. We offered the exact same food for the exact same price for a period of like 3 weeks. In one of the canteens, we had communication on food waste or on climate friendliness, and in the other one we didn't. So what did we do? We had like a quasi-experimental design setup on campus to kind of raise awareness of what interventions can do to a specific group of people in the cohort. And that was cool because we had students who did master thesis on that. We had professors who got incredible data. because you have like 3,000 meals per day for a course over the course of 3 weeks. That's amazing data. I mean, that's amazing. And then we had like an impact on the campus, because that ultimately was used to change campus gastronomy in the long term. So this is, I guess, a good story, a good case of how you can really use the skills that you have in the campus and really make a difference for the campus.
Thanks for sharing both the failure and the success story. And Lina, obviously the same question doesn't go for you, but I was thinking that in some sense in academia, we are facing the type of challenge that you in policymaking must often face, namely that we want to change a system, we want to convince many individuals within the system to change their behaviors. And ideally, we would like to do that quickly in a top-down way, probably, but that will not work very easily. So that's probably the type of challenge that in policymaking you're confronted with a lot. So is there something where we from academia can learn from success stories in policymaking, how to make our initiatives work and how to generate buy-in from everybody who's involved?
Well, that's a hard one. I mean, it's always about communication, and I think your examples show this, right? If you teach people about what it actually means for them, like for their everyday life, and not like in general the globe and the global and the society in general, but for their personal life. I think that's very helpful. Martin, I was pretty impressed by this thing about looking at the people that work in the labs directly and that work there. Time, I think that is something probably we need to think more about, who is the recipient of our measures and who do we need as an ally or as allies to implement those policies. And I think that's a question we have, we think about in politics, but also should be thought about in academia. I think that that's a very, very good example. And maybe one last thing about ETH and about every second year a new computer. That made me think about, is there too much money in the system? Like, I mean, really, that is. I
think they changed it by now.
Okay.
I might be mistaken. It might be 3 years, but it's still like, you know, there's some people who have to say, I still can use it. It's okay. But then someone from IT comes and says, no, we have to put Windows 11, and your computer doesn't work on Windows 11. So there's a bunch of things that are inherent in the system that are kind of not sustainable.
Yeah.
Raising a very tricky question there, though, about whether there is sufficient or insufficient funding in academia. But I would like to move on from the individual initiatives that we've heard about and also where things failed and where they succeeded to this question, how do we get from these individual success stories, how do we really get to a broader systemic change? Now that has very many different aspects, and Jerome and Martin, you both raised the question about targets and standards. How can we get academia to accept targets or standards? Who sets them? And also for Lina, the question will be, what is the role of policymakers in that?
I don't know the answer, but I think one start is the students actually, is to really engage with them and define what's important, because what we realized was when we started the project is cell biology students at most universities does not get any teaching on sustainability during their 4 or 5 year career. So that means they don't get any standards. They often teach, in our case, for the practica, we have to teach them with lots of plastics, which is not needed, but for some insurance company reasons, we need to use plastics and not glass. So we're actually pushing the system or the younger people in the wrong direction already, I have often the feeling. So if we could correct that to the other side and really show them it's possible to do sustainable research and give them examples and give them the tools to do it, it will not be a quick fix, but it will help over time to instill this culture. And they will be, at some point, the professors or the rectors from the universities, and will show it. On the short term, I think there it's giving good examples. It's really showing examples like the ETH or other universities. There are many good examples that it is possible, and also to stay competitive. So it's not just about the money, but really taking sometimes difficult decisions to be more sustainable. That these actually pay off in the long term. Yeah.
Cool. Well, you know, we see a lot of institutions and they set targets, and then they look at the actions they can take to you know, achieve these targets. And all of, you know, there's a variety of initiatives they need to, you know, that involve a lot of people. They can engage on labs, buildings, and etc. But what I usually find, and it, you know, you said give examples, but usually find is that within each institution there's a group of more, you know, pioneering-minded people that want to give something a try, and they're ready to give an initiative a try. And you know, I was saying we need to, you know, push standards and et cetera, but actually the reality is that in most institutions you need to try it and show that it works with that group of pioneering people, to evidence it, to get, you know, a good story, and to get some figures to support it, and to get people to feel warm and fuzzy about it. Which I've heard that expression, but they need to feel more comfortable when it's something that's, you know, not too far away. So whatever the initiative is, I think, you know, once you set the target, is that you get the people that are willing to give it a try, you shout about them, and then you repeat and try to grow from there. And in terms of actually how it changes on the ground, yeah, that's what I would say.
And I think to then, so I agree with you. You need, like pioneers, you need people to try it out. But in order to push it to a systemic level, you need policy making and standards. And you in your introductory talk, you talked about we have labor standards and security standards and I don't know what, but not so much sustainability standards. And I agree with you. And I would love to say, well, it's so easy and we just set up standards and then that's it. But that process takes so much time, because everything takes so much time. And then you would hopefully do not only have it on a national level, but on a European level. So that's something, yeah, you need to work on. And I think it would be too optimistic to say that it's done within a few I don't know, 2 years and then it's done. It takes many years. I mean, you need someone to develop it. Yeah, so that would that's maybe a little bit pessimistic view on this. I'd love to have it, but it takes time to develop.
Omar, with you?
Well, the thing is, there's something, as I mentioned earlier with the computer example, there's something inherently inhibiting people from either doing sustainability science research or from engaging in kind of an activist behavior. And I think that is deeply linked to like the reward and evaluation system. So sustainability science, which you would need for people to like get the science to do the decision making, is per se intern transdisciplinary. So people probably are more reluctant to do this in an early career stage because it's so time consuming. You have to really sit down and talk to people, understand their methodologies, and this takes a lot of time. At the same time, like someone says, if you want to become a professor, you have to publish as hell. So where do I take the time, right? So it's publish or perish. And I, of course, go into my disciplinary field because there I'm faster. I publish myself, I publish with my friends, and right away I get a publication out, and then I get promoted, and there you have it. And the other thing is evaluation system does not take account of climate sustainability. So, or like activism, let's say. So if you, Astrid, give a talk for a newspaper, or if you go into a school and give a little lecture, nobody cares. Right? It's you who has this inherent will to kind of share your knowledge and go train people. But if it comes to promotion and career advancement, people look at classic academic CVs, and that's a fundamental problem. I think this is where policymakers, and in some countries this is already happening. The Research Excellence Framework in the UK takes account of, for example, how do people engage with public, Yeah? Is there like, do they engage in public dissemination activities? And that is then ultimately also valued in your career advancement. I think this is a major paradigm shift that has to happen in the academic system for people to not only do research, but also to like communicate the findings and get people really on board to change their mentalities.
So Omar, you highlighted some of the sort of things that make it difficult for academics to engage with their climate sustainability. Martin and Jerome, in your answers, there were also sort of more long-term strategies, right? Engaging the students or having some pioneers who try it out. But the time is running out. So does this actually mean that in academia we have failed as a self-determined system to just recognize the crisis and act on it on time, and it is now time for policymakers to step in and impose on us rules how to become more climate sustainable? Or do you still see a possibility how we can do this in a self-determined way, which will probably take better care of the quality of research, of the freedom of academia?
So yes, I think we failed in a certain sense, because if you look at what came after, like the Club of Rome, many of the universities signed many treaties and many declarations starting from the end 80s, and little has changed. So we didn't manage to go from the science, so all our colleagues, our climate scientists, warned us a long time ago to really put it into make it part of our core business, or put it into action in our own environment. I think we still can do it, but we need to be fast. I think personally that yes, so outside pressure needs to increase, but I also believe that the creativity and the will to change is also there. So for example, we did a big survey on campus, and 85% of the people on campus are said like, look, I'm even willing to change the way I do science and to become more sustainable. So I think the willingness is there. We just need to find the tools to harvest that. And I think one of them is to really look at the younger generation, or the early career scientists, and give them the opportunity to tackle these problems.
So Lina, you might have heard the phrase, the outside pressure needs to increase. So I think that can be construed as a call for policymakers to also step in at some point.
Yeah. As I said, I'm not very optimistic that setting standards for sustainability standards, which are then not only used in research institutions, but in every, everywhere, because everywhere there are supply chains and stuff which are not very sustainable. So setting those things takes time, and is nothing to like for short-term solution. But as I said, I think they are very from a policy perspective, very clear things to do, which can be done now and which need to be done now, because those are often public institutions, and where it's also, I see it as the responsibility of the state to act. Like, for example, the modernization of buildings, expanding renewable energies in universities, all those kind of things. So that, in my point of view as a policymakers, that's where politicians need to start, because it's the easiest way to go, and that's where you have direct and quick effects. And in addition to that, setting incentives, of course, but also thinking about standards is I think a way to go forward.
Yeah. Go ahead. Well, I liked your example before about hybrid, in terms of, you were saying we don't have to go one way with meetings, and you don't have to go with the other, and just, between policymakers and grassroots efforts, it doesn't, I kind of like that, like we don't have, it doesn't have to all come from above or all below. And in fact, it's most effective when you make a beautiful sustainability sandwich of the two in the middle. And kind of actually, that's in some ways, I entirely agree. You know, we do need to create more effort in standards that eventually, once we get them to a point, then we need policymakers to help us advance them so they can cascade out. Once we've shown that they work. But yeah, we do have a bit of work to continue to produce them, but yes, so I would agree, just a balance between the two.
Thanks for the sandwich analogy. That's a great way to remember that, maybe. Yeah. But I'm wondering, to facilitate that sandwich or that dialogue, right? What would you see, what are sort of platforms or organizations that can concretely implement that? How do we get the grassroots initiatives and the policymakers and everybody in between together? Well,
are you asking me?
I'm asking everybody, but
if I may help you out a little bit. Maybe I'm not answering the question, but I think what we didn't mention yet is like, or what you mentioned in your presentation, and was also in the report, obviously, it's like alliances of universities. That's very important, sharing best practices. And I have been to a lot of conferences in my life where you get like really important people on the panel to really like showcase their own, my university is doing this and that. So the moment it gets cool, I guess, the moment presidents and rectors and all these like leadership people can make a case out of this. And it's also a bit a question of legacy. Let's not forget these people are scientists. If you can make the point and if you can make the case that sustainability is cool and people can really like profile their institution with this in these conferences with different other universities, that's a good development, I find. And the other thing we must not forget that there's not only like science and policy, that's some other actors in the field as well. One I would like to highlight is like the ranking agencies. These have been applying a lot of pressure on the system simply by imposing sustainability ratings. Times Higher Education just came up with a quasi-intransparent methodology and really forced people into a ranking corset and then kind of ranked them, and we're like, oh, you know, but ultimately something happens with this within the institution when you are forced to act by an external player, which doesn't have to be politics only. Can also be the private sector.
And may I add, I think universities and research institutions are in a very privileged position because they are heard, they are trusted in society and by politicians, and they can use this voice and this kind of soft power to put pressure on policymakers as well.
But just on that trust, I think this is one of the reasons we need to act on climate sustainability, right? Because if we are the ones who communicate that there is a climate crisis, but we don't actually care about that in how we conduct our everyday work, then we are in danger of losing that trust, right? So this is one of the motivations, in fact, to act on it. Mm-hmm. In view of time, I would now like to open the floor also to questions from the audience here in the room and from the online audience. And because we are live streaming, here in the room, you need to wait to get the microphone before you can ask your question. And I can see there's a question in the front right here.
Thank you so much, Antje Brock, Freie Universität Berlin. So I'd like to start my question from the 1.0 degrees goal, right? And so I wonder, when we are focusing on the academic sector to get to zero as quickly as possible, do we have opportunity costs? Because we might, as this also solutions creator, maybe, you know, we should maybe follow the Pareto principle, getting to 80% in 20% of the time, and then investing the rest of the time, because it's really hard to also get this sector CO2 free or neutral, that there are other parts in society that are, compared to the academic sector, contributing much, much more. And to, as scientists, you know, create a pathway where this is as a bigger priority, where this is being solved. So putting ourselves in perspective with and there is data on that 10% of the whole population in the world is producing more than 50% of the CO2 emissions. And so putting that whole thing into perspective, So that's my question about the opportunity costs. Thank you.
Yeah, Martin, go ahead.
It's a really good question. I would say is that there are resource pressures on science already in terms of finances. We exclude the environment in some senses. We accept that there's a large financial pressure to do science. And I'd say that, I recognize that we don't know how to do net zero science, and I think it's really important to say that. And I think you make a good point about getting to 80% and the balance. But I'd also say is that, you highlighted that, the group of, Westerners, we have a very high emissions per person. And actually, as scientists, it's much higher. And so the actions that we can take in the lab immediately would enable, it's greater than the actions that we might take at home, which we're all asking people to take. So it's not to say that I don't think we need to fixate on that last 10 or 20, and it is a good point. But it's not to say that we shouldn't enable it because it's such a high impact area still. And yeah, I guess you agree.
So let's take an online question next. So we've heard in several of the Impulse talks about the difficulty to actually get to know the climate footprint of one's own institution, right? On the other hand, one needs an evidence base. So there's a question from Joe Allat from the UK Research and Innovation. What do you suggest universities or institutions should report on in their climate footprint of their research without it becoming a huge burdensome task? So how do we do the reporting and how do we get the evidence base efficiently?
So first, I don't agree that it's a big task. It's doable. We've done it as volunteers, and we managed to get a quite good footprint. We're missing a bit. The other thing is a method many people are using is a money-based approach, where you take how much money you spend, put it in different categories, and then have a conversion rate to CO2. This was also done by the University of Copenhagen. And most universities have a good budget planning, and so it's doable. It's just how much, because then, I mean, you had the number of 15 tons. I would guess definitely if they're research-based, most universities would be at 30 tons and per person and even more. So it's quite a big amount to do. So my opinion is as complete as possible, and it's doable. There should be no excuse.
I agree. But it's still step zero, as you mentioned earlier. Like simply having the balance doesn't make a difference yet, but it's a good fundament. And I'm very skeptical about developing some sort of a one-size-fits-all methodology, and I don't think this is actually necessary. Interestingly, the way we do our greenhouse gas emission balance is closer to the one of the University of Zurich, which is next door, than with our sister organization in Lausanne, interestingly, because we kind of collaborate more. It's okay, I guess, to have different effects. And I'm not saying that this is like super accurate science, what I showed you earlier. It's just indication for you to know where are the levers and where shall we put our priorities. And that's very helpful. So I guess if you manage to get the data in a way, that's already a good step. And what we would do now is we would take these bars that you saw earlier, these like different categories, and really go into these individually and see what are the biggest chunks. Everything else is probably a bit unrealistic. Yeah? You can't get to zero just like that. It's a process, and you really have to convince a lot of people. You have to go into these, and then from the better the data, the more concrete can the measures be. And people like statistics in universities and people like to see progress and like to measure this kind of stuff. So as long as this is coherent within your own institution, I think that's okay.
There were more questions in the room earlier. Yeah.
Jacob Schweitzer, I'm from the Max Planck Sustainability Network. Within the Max Planck Society, we have several hundred colleagues who are active for sustainability measures in over 85 institutes, and we have the big issue, the big problem to exchange the ideas. The people are so busy implementing the ideas, concepts, experiences, so that they just don't have the energy anymore to communicate their best practices, their ideas. And so actually the entire sustainability transformation has two steps. First of all, you have to implement the things, and before you also have to research the ideas, concepts whatsoever. And we have tried to establish a sustainability wiki but we just don't have the manpower to maintain it and to organize it. And actually, our idea was to open this sustainability wiki to colleagues all over the world, but right now it's only us using it, and even within the Max Planck Society, we have issues exchanging the ideas. How can we make this more efficient? Because it's no use to reinvent the wheel all over again. Maybe you have ideas how we can exchange ideas better and more efficiently.
I can just agree with the evaluation, and the convincing we still have to do is you have sustainability here and you have science here, and they're two separate worlds, right? And it's easy to convince 10, 15% of colleagues that really want to engage, and of course they have little time because they have other things to do. But we don't manage to reach this 75%, I have the feeling, and bring these two worlds together. So if it's rules in the university or academic system, or more motivation or more money, I don't know, but we need to bring them together soon to get the manpower to just drive it very quickly. Yeah. So no solutions, but a very similar observation. Yeah.
And I'll just tell a nice story, and actually it's where I met some of the Max Planck Sustainability Network members. It was in the middle of the pandemic. We hosted we have a Green Labs network in the UK, and we invited some of the people from the network and also some from Green Labs Austria. And we hadn't actually heard from each other. We hadn't met each other all working on these initiatives, but it was amazing. We got to hear all these great stories, these case studies and efforts and people working in different directions, EPFL, the Scope 3 work, and et cetera. It was really great. And I'd say that, what came out of that is that we need to do more. And there's been an effort to, at least CELS, which I know you know about, is the European network of sustainable labs. So I think we need to develop that more, because there's so many benefits that come out of it, especially when they're not sort of corporate run, to be frank. When they come from the folks that are doing the actions, I think it makes a big difference. So more of those.
At ETH, we were lucky that one of our former presidents really felt that this is an important topic. So he employed someone, and this full-time staff. There's a budget for someone to work on this, including me now. To come back to the students, I don't know if this is very relevant for Max Planck now, because you tend to have researchers, PhD further on. But for everyone else, I guess, really the students are the biggest stakeholder group, and they have a tremendous power in the institution that they might not always be aware of. But just to give you one example, there was a sustainability week that students at the University of Zurich organized, and they invited all rectors from the cantonal universities. And then one of the students said, "Hey, why does ETH Zurich have a sustainability office and we don't?" In front of 500 people. Yeah. And then the rector, Frau Schenker-Vicky at that time of University of, I don't know if it was her, I don't want to put anyone's name out here, but someone there was an intense pressure on this person, and 10 years later, 1 year later or so, they had a full-time staff, and today they have 6 or 7 people working there. So it's really I don't want to make necessarily an analogy to Fridays for Future and people demonstrating as other ways also to advocate this, but really invite students. I also do this every now and then. I kind of talk to students and then I give them some advice on how they can actually use their democratic power to impose pressure on the leadership to change something. I think that's a very important driver for all this.
Thanks. And I see we are running a bit short on time, and I would like to apologize to the Swiss ambassador that we will not be Swiss on the end, but maybe take 2 or 3 more minutes for 1 or 2 final questions. So there's another one online, maybe also to you, Omar, namely from Claudia Kemper from IFOI. What is your experience to convince academic staff to reduce their air travel significantly? So maybe you could very briefly tell us about the ETH air travel reduction program and how it was successful.
We have a whole website on that, so you can really look into this. There's also publications on that. The key was really to use top-down and bottom-up. together. And really, this is where the magic happens. We had one colleague who went to all 16 departments to really negotiate what is feasible for you, because ultimately it's a disciplinary thing. People from computer science have to fly more because this is how the system runs. They go to conferences, give presentations, whereas people from like the social science department don't travel that much because they just do, I don't know, like local, regional stuff. So really like to understand, to really negotiate on an individual basis and really talk to people, get them where they are really, and use this very participatory approach on a very tailored level. It's it's a very long-winded process, and you might say we don't have time for this, but ultimately this is the way it works, right? Go to these people, talk to them, understand what their problems are, what their hindrances are, and then get them going together. This is how we did it for the Air Travel project.
Thank you. And to close the discussion, we'll take a final question from the room. So who will be quickest back there in the last row?
Thank you. I work at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, which is a foreign policy think tank, and I don't work in sustainability. So my questions may be a bit naive. If I understood some of you correctly, there's a prudent call for some more top-down regulation, and at the same time, the fear of academic freedom being curbed. So I would have the question to you, Mr. Kassab, who has this top-down approach to a certain extent by the Swiss government, if I understood you correctly. Has there been any curbing of academic freedom? And then my second question, you partly answered it in the answer just before, is what works in the top-down approach? Is it financial incentive structures? Is it, what kind of incentive structures work? Have there been studies on this? And are there cases of sanctions? And what are the effects of that? Thank you.
Anyone else wants to answer these questions? Has academic freedom been curbed? I don't think so, because it's like, we just started with this net zero thing, so maybe at some point someone will say, hey, you're curbing my academic freedom. But with the air travel project, no, because it was, and that's a bit the policy, do not force anyone to do anything. It has to be voluntary at some point, because otherwise people are very like, people don't want to, like, you don't get the buy-in simply. And this was a very like Swiss approach, really, of like going to these people, talking to them, understanding what is really like possible for you guys without compromising academic freedom, without compromising like network and stuff. For example, between 2019 and 2020, the CO2 emissions from flying went down by 80%. Yeah, simply because of COVID. Yet the number of international collaboration increased. So that's again similar to the studies you referred to. Simply because people couldn't fly anymore, it doesn't mean that they didn't collaborate really. So I would say no, academic freedom has not been curbed. And here we will also be in the net zero program. We will also be very, very like interactive and participatory, not to like overwhelm or like to force anyone into something. While at the same time raising awareness for the urgency. So it's not easy. But I think more and more people are understanding this now. And I have to say that the moment the Swiss government issued this mandate of net zero, that gave a lot of our projects a lot of, how do you say, like, Rückenwind, you would say in German, like, because, yeah, they empowered them because we could label them as, this is a net zero project. We have to do this, right? So I guess people have understood that this is an urgent topic, and they're open, as Jérôme said earlier, to really change their behavior on a daily basis. And for the other questions, maybe for reasons of time, we could talk about this over something to drink.
So there's a number of questions left online and also in the room, which I think shows that there's just much more to discuss on this topic. And I think one of the questions that remains is what came up in a number of answers was that we need a combination of both grassroots as well as top-down And so a dialogue needs to happen. But where will this dialogue happen, and who will organize it, and how does this dialogue happen quickly and then lead to action? I think these are questions that we are still left with, and that we can maybe discuss later, and hopefully also at further events. So I would like to thank the panelists for their impulse talks and for all of their answers to the questions. And my apologies for delaying your final remarks by 5 minutes.
No problem at all. My final remarks will be extremely brief, because I don't think I will do justice in trying to summarize this very rich discussion we had just a moment ago. I just take away from myself 5 buzzwords. It's people, it's commitment, it's money, it's network, and it's sandwich. Which brings me then to the last part of the evening, the food. I would like to invite you all cordially to a hopefully very sustainable buffet, because we are really careful about only buying stuff which is local, regional, and green. So I hope we have achieved that for tonight. At least our chef is really very careful about that. So I thank again you, Madam Eichhorn, but also all the panel collectively for a very, very rich discussion. I have learned a lot, and I guess you have also learned a lot as well. And this is open now for a conversation among those who are present. I would like to bid my farewell to all those who have joined us online. Sorry that you cannot join us, but maybe hopefully you can raise a glass on sustainability at home. Have a pleasant evening. Enjoy it. Thank you very much for attending.